My wife works abroad while I raise our kids, then I reconnected with my childhood friend and almost had an affair. My wife and I have been living apart for a while now. She works overseas, while I stay behind, taking care of our two little boys, who are 4 and 3. On top of that, I juggled both of our jobs. We originally lived together, but after a situation arose that put our kids in danger, I knew I couldn't let that happen again. Quitting her job wasn't something she was willing to consider, so I made the decision to move back to our home country with the boys, while she stayed behind. She comes to visit us a few times a year. Right now, I'm living with close family friends. Deciding to leave was one of the hardest, most painful choices I've ever made. I carried a lot of resentment toward my wife for choosing her career over our family. It stung. But at the same time, I love her. I couldn't picture my life without her. There were moments when divorce crossed my mind, but in the end, we agreed to try and work things out. Then there was the other woman, an old childhood friend. We used to be close when we were kids, but after my mom passed away, I left my hometown to live with my dad, and we lost touch. Over the years, I kept in contact with some other folks from that town, but I hadn't seen her again until I moved back home with the kids. I started visiting my hometown more often to stop by my mom's grave and catch up with old neighbors. That's when I ran into her. Seeing her again filled me with nostalgia. Honestly, I get sentimental about everything from my childhood. At first, it was completely innocent. I was just happy to reconnect with someone from my past. She had a 6-year-old son, so naturally, we started taking our kids to the park together. We'd sit on a bench, have some coffee, and talk about life. It felt good to have that connection. I was open about it with my wife, told her I had reconnected with an old friend. She didn't mind at all. In fact, she even joked, asking if she should be jealous, but I knew she wasn't serious. She trusted me completely. That's why I feel so terrible now. We started meeting up a couple of times a month, and somewhere along the way, the dynamic shifted. I don't even know when it happened. All I know is that one day, I realized I was looking forward to seeing her a little too much. We'd hug when we met up and again before we left, and those hugs started lingering. I'd feel this deep ache when she pulled away. She'd talk about how her ex had mistreated her and her son, and I felt this overwhelming need to protect her. Then she started making little comments, things like, "Your son and mine get along so well, it's like they're brothers." Somewhere in the mix of all this, I found myself confiding in her too. I shared my frustrations about my marriage, and she listened. She understood. And I won't lie, it felt good. It felt good to have someone who saw me, appreciated me, made me feel special. I realized I was entertaining thoughts I shouldn't have been having, imagining a life where I had never met my wife, where I had moved back home earlier and reconnected with my childhood friend instead. I wondered what it would have been like if somehow, we had ended up with the same kids, just with each other. In my mind, it seemed like we could have both been happy and avoided so much heartache. If I'm being brutally honest, she and I are probably a better match. She puts her child first, no hesitation. She sees me for who I am. My wife does too, but it always feels like me and the kids are second place to her work. Even when she's physically with us, her mind is somewhere else, always preoccupied, always thinking about her job. She's a good person, and she does important work, but that job has broken her. And the truth is, she was already carrying deep wounds long before she started it. I know she took the job to cope with her past, but in the process, she keeps reopening the same scars, and my kids and I are the collateral damage. I don't say any of this to justify what I've done. I know it's wrong. I just want to explain how it got to this point. My childhood friend would compliment me all the time on my looks, on my strength, on the kind of father I am. She made me feel like I mattered. With my wife, sometimes it felt like she only loved me because I was there, because I was the one who stayed. Like it could have been anyone who loved her, and she would have loved them back the same way. It wasn't always like that, but over time, that's how it started to feel. And I didn't even realize it until I saw the contrast, until I had someone else looking at me in a way that made me feel appreciated. I should have put a stop to it before it ever got this far. In the beginning, I brushed it off. I told myself, everyone has inappropriate thoughts now and then, but what matters is how you act on them. Only, I let it slip too far. Looking back, even some of our casual banter was crossing a line. It was flirting, plain and simple. And that's not just a thought. That's an action. Today was a slap in the face. She asked to meet up, just the two of us, without the kids. I had my friend babysit and went to see her, and she got straight to the point. She told me she knew we had feelings for each other and said I should leave my wife to be with her. The second those words left her mouth, reality hit me like a truck. It was like, all at once, I realized how much of a fantasy I had been living in. I felt sick. I didn't deny my feelings. Maybe I should have. Instead, I just sat there, stunned. She kept telling me to think it over, and when she saw how shaken I was, she backed off, saying she'd give me time. Then she left. But there's nothing to think over. I love my wife. I'm not leaving her. And yet, I didn't say that out loud, and that alone is eating me up inside. I know I need to tell my wife. I just have no idea how. She's coming home in October, and this feels like the kind of thing that needs to be said face to face. But do I really want to ruin her trip with this? I could leave the kids with my friends and go see her instead, but just the thought makes me sick. I keep picturing her smile when she sees me, how happy she'll be, then how utterly devastated she's going to look when I tell her the truth. I feel like throwing up. Part of me just wants to say nothing, cut ties with my childhood friend and move on like this never happened. But that wouldn't be right. And at this point, it would be impossible to go back to just being friends. I know honesty is the only way forward. I owe her that much. I just don't know how to do it. I feel disgusted with myself. I feel like a fool. I don't want to tell my friends, either one of them would be furious with me for nearly cheating, and the other might actually encourage me to leave my wife. I feel lost. Like I need someone to tell me what to do, because right now, I can't seem to figure it out for myself. The sheer number of comments has been overwhelming, and honestly, I need to get some sleep. Tomorrow, I'm planning to sit down with my friends, tell them everything, and after probably getting an earful, see if they'd be willing to watch my kids while I fly out to see my wife and tell her the truth. If they can't, I'll reach out to a few other people. And if that doesn't work out either, I'll have to break the news to her over Zoom, even though that's the last thing I want. I've also decided that I need to cut ties completely with my childhood friend. I'm going to text her and make it clear that I don't want to see her again, and then I'll block her. As for my marriage, I'm not leaving my wife. And if she decides to leave me, then that's it. I won't jump into another relationship. I won't start dating my ex-friend. I love my wife, and as long as I still feel that way, it wouldn't be fair to anyone else to even try. To avoid having to repeat myself 100 times, I want to clear up some things. My wife is an aid worker. She doesn't do it for the money, she does it because she believes it's what God called her to do. I do gig work and sometimes construction. The flexibility allows me to be home with the kids more. I also put my wife through college, so no, I'm not freeloading off her. I'll admit, I am kind of freeloading off the friend I live with, but we've got an arrangement that works for everyone, and nobody's unhappy with it. The reason I left with the kids in the first place was because we were carjacked at gunpoint. My wife moves around a lot for work, so finding a safer place that's still close to her wasn't really an option. Either we travel with her under the organization she works for, or we stay put somewhere stable. As for my childhood friend, I don't think she ever set out to have an affair with me. But at this point, it doesn't really matter. Edit, for everyone telling me to get a stable job so my wife can come home, you're misunderstanding the situation. Do you really think my wife and I haven't had this conversation? She's not quitting her job. She's made that crystal clear. Her work is her priority, and I promise you, she's not doing it for financial reasons. If she ever said she'd even consider leaving it if I got a more stable job, I wouldn't hesitate, I'd do it in a heartbeat. But that's not the reality. Anyway, I talked everything over with my friends, and they were surprisingly understanding. The plan now is for me to fly out and see my wife sometime next week, but we still have to sort out the logistics. At first, I thought about reaching out to her boss to arrange a surprise visit, but that just felt cruel, showing up unexpectedly, making her happy to see me, only to completely break her heart right after. So instead, I called her. I told her that everything was fine at home, but that I needed to talk to her in person about something bad. I said I'd be flying out soon. She asked me to just tell her right then and there, because otherwise, she'd be stressing about it the whole time. I almost did. But then she suddenly changed her mind. She said, "No, don't tell me. I want to see you first." So I held back. Update. A lot of people have been asking for an update, so here it is. But before I get into it, there are a couple of things I need to say. First, I just want to thank everyone who commented, regardless of their opinion. I especially appreciated hearing from people who had been in similar situations, or who had experiences that resonated with different parts of my story. At the time, my head was all over the place, and I don't think I expressed enough gratitude, but it really did mean a lot that so many people took the time to share their perspectives. Second, I need to set the record straight. A lot of people were bashing my wife, and I should have defended her more than I did. Let's get something clear, my wife would never cheat on me. Ever. She's honest, she's loyal, and frankly, she's a far better person than I am. I also saw a lot of comments claiming she's negligent, that she doesn't care about me or our kids. That's completely wrong. She's incredibly loving. Yes, she's busy with her work, but she's told me countless times that she thinks about us every single moment. And when she's home, she dedicates all the time she can to us. Sometimes, she gets distracted, her job weighs on her because she sees things that would break most people. But that doesn't mean she doesn't care about her family. It's not like she's one of those parents who are physically present but checked out, glued to their phone while their kids try to get their attention. Also, I noticed that people were going after me, too. I get it, I screwed up. I accept that. But some of the stuff being said about my wife was just over the top, and I won't stand for that. I actually showed my post to my best friend, and she pointed out something I hadn't even considered: how much of the criticism against my wife was just straight up sexist. People were calling her a bad mother because she doesn't get to be with her kids much. But think about all the jobs that mostly men do: military, trucking, oil rig work, jobs that keep them away from home for long stretches. Nobody says they don't love their kids. Nobody tells their wives to leave them. So if you're coming down on my wife for it, but you wouldn't say the same thing to a man in her position, you need to take a hard look at your double standards. And for those saying I need to get a better job so she can come home, would you say the same thing to a woman whose husband was the one working far away? And to the people saying we shouldn't be married or have kids because of her career, are you saying there just shouldn't be any aid workers? Or that aid workers shouldn't be allowed to have families? Do you realize how much fewer people would be willing to do this work if it meant sacrificing their chance at having a family? None of it makes any sense. Anyway, I saw my wife. I told her everything. And somehow, despite everything, we still had a good visit. Before I could say anything, she told me she wanted to show me something first. I had no idea what to expect, but I agreed. She led me to this little waterfall, tucked away in a place she visits whenever she gets the chance. It was beautiful. And then she told me that every time she comes here, she thinks of me. That she always wishes she could show it to me. Hearing that nearly broke me. I was so overwhelmed I almost couldn't go through with telling her. I had already told my wife I had something bad to say, so there was no way around it. I had to tell her. We sat there for a while in silence until she finally said she was ready. And as much as it tore me apart, I told her everything. She tried to stay calm, tried to be understanding, but I could see the hurt in her eyes. A part of me almost wished she'd just yell at me, maybe even slap me, anything that would feel like the punishment I deserved. But she didn't. She just thanked me for being honest. Then she asked what I planned to do next. I told her that, no matter what, I wasn't going to stay in contact with my former friend. And beyond that, I could only hope that she would forgive me and still come home to us in October like she had planned. Her response caught me off guard. She said I was already forgiven. She asked me for more details, wanting to understand exactly what had happened and how I felt about it all. I did my best to answer her honestly, but it was hard. The more I talked, the more I could see the pain creeping in. Eventually, she just said, "Okay," and we walked back to her base without saying much else. That night, we talked more. She knows how difficult it is for me to live this way, raising the kids alone while she's away. She asked me, again, if I was absolutely sure I still wanted to be with her. I told her the truth. I knew she wasn't going to quit her job, but one of the hardest things for me was that even when she was home, her mind was still somewhere else. She was always weighed down by work, always stressed, and it hurt to see her like that. She told me she'd bring it up in therapy and try to work on being more present with me and the kids when she was home. She kept pushing, asking if there was anything else she could do aside from quitting her job to make things better. That's when I told her how I'd been feeling for a long time. How sometimes, it seemed like she only loved me because I loved her. Like it could have been anyone in my place, as long as they had stuck around. She broke down in tears. She told me that wasn't true. She apologized and then did her best to list as many specific things as she could about me that she loved, things that were only me. I did the same for her. She said she was relieved we had this conversation, and grateful I still wanted to fight for our marriage. Because when I first told her I had something bad to say in person, her first thought was that I was asking for a divorce. She admitted she's always afraid I'll leave her, but she's thankful for every day that I don't. I promised her I had no plans to leave, but I also told her I had that same fear, that one day, she would decide I wasn't enough. It turned into one of the most honest and meaningful conversations we've had in a long time. During the rest of my visit, I spent some time at her job site, helping out where I could. The local kids started teasing her about me, which was honestly adorable. Things aren't perfect, but they're going to be okay. I also know that a lot of people had strong opinions on my situation. Some said my wife should leave me because what I did was just as bad as physically cheating. Others said I did nothing wrong. Personally, I think the truth is somewhere in the middle. I did do something wrong, but I also stopped it before it went any further. And for everyone saying I should divorce my wife, I'm not. She has her flaws, sure, but she's also one of the best people I've ever known. And those flaws? They come from things she's lived through that I can't even begin to imagine. I made a choice to love her despite the things she struggles with. I know myself. I will always love her. Even if we divorced, I'd still think about her every single day. I'd wonder how she was doing, whether she was okay. Even if I wanted to move on, I couldn't. It wouldn't be fair to anyone else. For me, it's my wife or no one. Update 2. Hey, this is sort of an update to my previous posts. If you're interested, you can find them on my profile. I can't link them here. But honestly, this is more than just an update. There's a lot on my mind, and I need to get it off my chest. A while ago, I posted about how I realized I was in an emotional affair with an old friend while my wife was working in the Philippines. That issue is resolved. My wife forgave me. I haven't spoken to my old friend since, and I've been much more careful with my other female friends. But some of the comments from my last posts have been lingering in my head. And my wife is home now, with some big news of her own. First, the good news. My wife is pregnant again. And despite everything, I'm happy about it. I know some people in my last post asked if we were using protection, if we were actively trying to avoid bringing more kids into this situation. The honest answer? No, we weren't. And yeah, I didn't want to admit that before, for obvious reasons. I don't have a defense for it other than I'm stupid. The other major thing is that my wife might have OCD. She actually realized she was probably pregnant a long time ago but didn't tell me or even take a test. She explained it like this, like there were two versions of herself in her head. One part was screaming at her to go get a test, to figure things out. But the part of her that was actually in control? That part refused to do anything except carry on like nothing was happening. She admitted she was terrified to take the test because she knew that if it was positive, she wouldn't be allowed to go on her next assignment due to the risk of Zika virus. So instead, she just ignored it. She told herself she'd deal with it later. It took her weeks before she finally broke down and told her therapist what was going on. And when she did, everything else came spilling out, too. Turns out, she had been hiding a lot from her therapist. She hadn't been honest about how compelled she felt to keep doing this job, about what it did to her when she wasn't working, about the stress and the pressure she put on herself. She knew that if she told the full truth, her therapist would have made her take a break, and she wasn't ready to face that. But after she found out she was pregnant, she knew she had to do the right thing. So she finally told her therapist everything. Then she tried to explain it to me. She told me what it feels like to be inside her own head. And honestly, I don't think I ever truly understood until now. My wife believes God wants her to do this work. The way she explained it, her mind is constantly flooded with thoughts about all the terrible things happening in the world, every awful situation she's ever witnessed, every time she could have helped but didn't, even when she had no real way to. She feels like she has to keep working, like stopping would mean failing people who need her. For the longest time, she thought these thoughts were God speaking to her. She never told her therapist about that because she was afraid she wouldn't understand. But when she finally opened up, her therapist asked her something that stuck with her. If God is loving, why would he want you to be constantly consumed by things that make you miserable? That question was the turning point. It made my wife open to the possibility that this might not be divine guidance, it might be a mental illness. She's home now, 2 weeks earlier than planned, so she can start prenatal care right away and get a more in-depth mental health assessment. From what I understand, her therapist strongly suspects OCD, but since she isn't a psychiatrist, she can't officially diagnose or prescribe medication. I feel awful for her. And honestly, I feel like I failed her, too. I should have dug deeper, asked more questions, pushed her to open up more about what she was feeling. My wife was more honest with me than she was with her therapist, but I assumed she was telling both of us everything and that the therapist was doing everything she could to help. Now, looking back, I realize my wife was holding so much in things I should have seen sooner. As much as I hope this means things will start to get better, I know how hard this is on her. And that weighs on me. She was raised in a deeply religious household. But after certain things happened in her life, she lost her faith. She started believing that if God did exist, he must not approve of her. When I met her, she was in a very dark place. So when these thoughts about fixing the world started filling her mind, she found comfort in them. She believed it meant she was finally reconnecting with her faith. Now, realizing that these thoughts might not have been from God but rather a symptom of OCD? That's been devastating for her. I hope her therapist will be able to help her work through that, too. But it's complicated because my wife doesn't trust religious leaders anymore, which makes it even harder for her to process this loss of what she thought was a rekindled faith. I believe in God, but my faith doesn't look the same as hers. I'm not as devout, and I don't always know the right thing to say. But I did tell her how sorry I am for everything she's been going through. That I'm proud of her for finally reaching out for help, even though I know how hard it was. I told her I'm grateful she opened up to me and that she can always count on me for whatever she needs. And I told her I know God sees how hard this has been for her and that He's proud of her, too. That made her cry. But I think, in a good way. She's been home for a few days now, and we're just taking things one step at a time. She has her first prenatal appointment next week, but we're still figuring out how to schedule her OCD evaluation. For now, we're just trying to cherish our time together as a family as much as possible. And the best news? After her maternity leave, instead of going straight back to work, my wife is thinking about going back to school. She wants to get her master's degree and learn another language or maybe even two. Part of the reason for this is that it would give her more flexibility in her job assignments. It could open up the possibility of working with refugees here in the US, instead of constantly traveling. Which would mean finally our family could find a place to settle permanently. She's not sure yet, and she wants to take her time figuring things out. But for the first time in a long time, I feel hopeful. Hopeful that we might actually get to build a life together as a family. I know this has been incredibly hard on my wife, and that makes me feel guilty for being happy. But I do hope this ends up being a positive turning point, not just for me, but for all of us. So far, the only people who know about the baby besides, well, Reddit, are my two closest friends, the ones we live with. My best friend is almost as excited as I am. She keeps bringing up ideas for a gender reveal party, completely at random, like in the middle of a conversation about the election or whatever. We haven't told the kids yet. My wife isn't very far along, and we don't want them to get excited or attached just in case something goes wrong. If the worst were to happen, we don't want them to have to go through that heartbreak. So I keep reminding my best friend to be subtle about it. She keeps forgetting. Luckily, the kids have no idea what she's talking about when she lets it slip. Anyway, that's my big news. Someone asked for an update, and I figured it was time to clear the air and get all of this off my chest. We're still in the thick of it. But for the first time in a long time, I actually feel like things might turn out okay.